بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And thank you for joining us once again in our series, Life, the Islamic Answer, in which we try to extract the principles and the teachings to live Islamically in an increasingly complex world. The first theme in our series is the theme of knowledge and reason in Islam, and we have covered a number of topics within that theme. The last, and in which we still find ourselves, is the topic of the community of knowledge. And we addressed a number of headings under the community of knowledge. First, we emphasized the idea of the social dimension in Islam. We said that Islam gives as much importance to us as human beings living in a group of other human beings as it does to us as individuals living our daily lives as separate entities. And so this also leads to responsibilities, to duties, and to rights that have to be looked at both as individuals and as part of communities. Within the topic of the community, we talked about a number of different practical teachings related to the community of knowledge specifically, including, for instance, the importance of gathering, at least in minimum, based on Islamic teachings, once a week, as we found in a number of hadith, and perhaps more if possible, and not simply gathering to gather, but gathering around knowledge for the purpose of acquiring knowledge and discussing knowledge. And we moved then to, after some practical considerations, to who belongs to this community of knowledge. And we saw that in our religion, there are specific categories that have been highlighted. Some of them are obvious: the teacher, the learner, and then we saw the hadith that basically say everyone who belongs to an Islamic community must also belong to a community of knowledge. And whether you are learning and officially and formally seeking knowledge or sharing knowledge with others or not, you must at least be a lover of these gatherings and these types of communities and find a way to support them, one way or another, at least with your love and at least with your respect, if not more. And then we started to talk a little bit more about who belongs to these communities of knowledge beyond the general, because we said there are categories that have either been highlighted by Islam itself, or there are categories that we think we need to address a little bit more closely because they are more relevant to us and we have a greater need to spend a little bit more time on those specific categories. So one of the categories had to do with children and the youth. And we saw that in our religion, there is a lot of importance given to everything related to teaching and upbringing and raising, whether it is our own children or children and the youth in general in communities. And so that was a heading, and we looked at some of the Islamic teachings around it. And we also saw that this cannot become an excuse for saying it is too late for me to learn. I've become too old. I didn't learn when I was younger. This would be un-Islamic. And as much as we have teachings emphasizing to learn as early as possible in life, we also have teachings praising and complimenting and encouraging those who want to learn in older age. It is never too late. And in fact, there's a great reward to those who struggle more because they are learning in a more advanced age. The second category that we looked at a little bit more closely is that of women specifically. And we said that if we were to go through the narrations that talk about knowledge and reason specifically, we may not find a lot of teachings directly addressing women and their role in acquiring knowledge, in sharing knowledge, and passing down knowledge to others. That's true. But because of the importance of the topic in our world today, in our communities today, because of the attacks against our religion, that our religion does not give a lot of importance, or in fact discourages women or sisters from learning and acquiring knowledge, for instance, and that this in fact is perhaps a misconception that we find within our own communities at times, depending on which communities we belong to. We thought that we would spend a little bit of time, and so we spent a couple of lectures to look at what Islam says in very practical terms about women and seeking knowledge, acquiring and passing down knowledge to others, acting as teachers and as learners. And inshallah, that discussion was clear. We simply wanted to add very concrete examples to show that these role models, these teachings that we're talking about, are not simply theoretical and abstract. They exist if we look for them in reality, in the real world. There are countless examples of women in Islam who have reached the highest levels of knowledge seeking and knowledge sharing. They were teachers, they were learners, they were people that by all standards we would consider to be ulama, scholars in Islam. And the fact that they were women did not in any way, shape or form prevent them from reaching those levels. And they never understood themselves as not being included in the Islamic teachings related to acquiring knowledge or sharing knowledge because they are women, or because they are mothers, or because they are someone who plays a more feminine role, let's say, at a social level or a biological level in society. So inshallah, that discussion was clear. And then we moved to the topic in which we find ourselves still, which is family, and the role of families in the community of knowledge. And as we said, and this is perhaps the fourth lecture about this, we are not trying to present all Islamic teachings related to the family, or the family structure, or the duties within the family, and so on and so forth, how to raise children, how to find a spouse, and so on and so forth. Our focus here is really to highlight some of the Islamic teachings that have to do with building an Islamic family as an ingredient of the community of knowledge, as an ingredient of an Islamic community of knowledge. Why is it that Islam gives this importance to the family within the Islamic community of knowledge? The role that the family plays, the Islamic family plays for the seeking of knowledge, for the acquisition of knowledge in Islam. So I will not provide a detailed recap, just highlights of where we left off, so that inshallah today we try to wrap up this topic of the family as an ingredient in the communities of knowledge in Islam, and we move inshallah to the next heading or the next topic within the community. We spoke about the importance of understanding the social transformations that have taken place in the world, and that today, therefore, whether it is Islamic or not, to have a family in the traditional sense is considered a challenge. And it does not necessarily go with the current, with the general movement as it used to be in the past. It went without saying that everyone who reached a certain age, they reached a certain maturity, would start a family. And this was simply the norm of how things were done until we reach about, a century or perhaps a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on where in the world. And you start to see a counter movement to that and a questioning of that social structure, which is the family. And should we even have families? Should we find spouses with whom we live and we build a family or not? And this starts to add an extra layer of challenge especially for a Muslim, because we are adding layers of Islamic teachings within that family structure that perhaps make it even more difficult to raise a family, to create a family in these types of circumstances. And so we need to understand, what does it mean to live in a world that goes against this more traditional way of thinking? What does Islam say about raising families to start with, finding spouses to start with? And then if Islam, we find, says, yes, we are still required to have families, then specifically what does it mean when it comes to raising children, to upbringing? How do we make that happen in a world where a lot of the movement, a lot of the thinking, a lot of the teachings and values and ideology is going against that? And this is the reason why we said it is much more relevant to talk about this topic now, to really try to understand from an Islamic perspective, what does it mean? We're not talking about raising a family as it was, 1,000 years ago, or in a vacuum, as they say, without any context. We're talking in a context that goes against these traditional values, these traditional ways of thinking. So what do we need to adapt, and how do we need to think about any of this? And then we have the Islamic family unit and the principles of Islamic upbringing in general, which we covered. And so quickly, what we addressed until now is that there is no doubt that in our religion, there is a lot of importance given to raising a family, to finding a spouse and to raising a family. This is extremely encouraged, not to say that depending on your situation, this is obligatory. And in fact, it is obligatory depending on someone's situation. Not only to find a spouse, but to have children is extremely encouraged in our religion. To have bigger families is strongly encouraged in our religion. And in any case, there's more that we discussed here, but this was simply to make it clear and to confirm the idea that despite where the world may be going, or the impression that we may get from society and some of the trends in society in the world, this becomes even more important to understand that Islam says these new trends are un-Islamic, they are not compatible with Islamic teachings, and so on and so forth. That's one. So this therefore then brings us to the discussion around the spouse selection. And of course, this is not a lecture or a series of lectures, as we said, to talk about all the criteria, but we saw that in our religion, there is a lot of importance that's going to be given to, if you want to start a family, the first decision that you have to make is going to have to start with, who are you choosing as a spouse? Because the family is going to be mainly built around this person as your partner in building this family. And so we went through a number of traits that were mentioned very quickly. Inshallah, the details of this will come in a later theme in the series dedicated to the family in Islam. But very quickly, we went through some of the traits. We said, especially in the case of the husband, for instance, the religious traits, but for both spouses, the moral traits, the cultural, socio-economic, and other traits that are mentioned. And even the hereditary traits, the genetic traits of the person are mentioned in our religion as being of importance. All of this will be passed down to the next generations, so therefore choose carefully and include the discussion that we just had, especially for us brothers, about the role of women and the seeking of knowledge and the sharing of knowledge that women can play, if you understand this topic of the community of knowledge and the role that every ingredient is playing. Right? So that you understand that this is a person that is going to be your partner in building this family, and therefore they have to be able to assume that responsibility. They have an awareness of it. They have at least an interest in improving, in acquiring what they need, so that you are two working together to build this Islamic family, and not one pulling and the other pulling in another direction. In any case, there's a lot more to discuss here. We leave it to another time. Then we talked about a little bit of the approach and the methodology of raising children in Islam. And these are very high-level principles that we covered very quickly. The importance that Islam gives to from a very young age, when you're raising children, you're bringing them up, that they start to understand that it's not only the external that matters, whether it's cleanliness and beauty and so on and so forth. You don't want to only focus on the outside. You also want to beautify and clean your inside, for instance. And that a lot of this is going to have to be taught by modeling. This is one of the main principles in our religion, that not everything is taught by the words that you are saying. The words can help, the words can guide, the words can give a little bit more direction, but a lot of the teaching, the main part of the teaching that you are passing on and the influence that you're creating on the next generation comes from the behavior that you are modeling, what your children see and not the words that you're saying. The importance of role models, we talked about. The importance of friends, we talked about, and inshallah we're going to come back to that quickly today. The idea of balancing between belief and action, and we ended once again here with the whole idea of parenting by example. That was one of the headings that we covered. The next heading, inshallah, this is just the recap before we talk about today's headings. The second one had to do with parenting by the principles of parenting in Islam. And we covered a few of them. We left a lot more details for the more detailed discussion. One of them having to do, for instance, with the importance of fairness and equity between the children, between the siblings, and treating the genders with the appropriate care. The tailored gradual progression, so that you are always tailoring your upbringing and your raising of the children based on where the child is, and constantly pushing them to improve based on what they can handle today. What they can handle today is different than what they could handle 5 years ago or 6 months from now. So you always tailor it to that, and every child is going to be different. The importance, and we know that in our religion there is entire chapters written about this, about how to make sure that you are able to provide discipline for the children, but in a way that does not break their personality, does not cause problems, issues, mistakes. It has to be just enough for the child to rectify behavior, to understand that there's something that is being done wrong, that it needs to be rectified, for instance. We talked about the harms of excessive attention, when parents give too much attention to the child one way or another, whether it's positive or negative. You don't want to catch everything that the child does wrong and mention it and follow up and police them, because this creates harmful effects. And you don't want to do the opposite and constantly praise the child and notice everything and make every small detail into a big deal, because that's not the case either, and both can be very harmful. Then we talked about the rights of children in Islam. And again, we could easily, write volumes about this, but here are the main headings that we went through quickly. The right to life, that the child has a right to come into this world. And we said that in our religion, the fact that a human being enters into this world is by itself a cause for celebration. And there are many ceremonies and rituals associated just with the fact that you have entered into this world. We recognize you as a new human being in this world. And in any case, the right to childhood. So Islam recognizes this new entity, this newborn, as a child. And this comes with a specific set of principles and teachings and rules and rulings that have to do with that child. So the well-being of the child, the protection of the child, the feeding of the child, so on and so forth. This child has every right to have the best childhood possible from the moment they are born, and this moves on. And we talked a lot about some of the teachings here. We won't repeat. We talked about the importance of the proper intellectual development of the child mentioned in Islamic teachings. We talked about the importance of the affective development, so the emotional development, that the child feels that they received enough love, not in those words, we are adding those words, but that the child does not feel that they lacked love later in life. These are some of the rights of the child, and we see a lot of Islamic teachings around all of this. We talked about the right of the child to purity and innocence, which is something that is directly attacked in today's world. Very much under threat, very difficult to create this kind of context for children today, that they are actually being raised in an environment that ensures their purity and their innocence long enough until they are mature, and that things are presented to them gradually and based on their level of maturity. In any case, we talked about this. The importance of giving children responsibilities gradually, teaching them to be themselves. We said that, unfortunately, the tendency is often going to be from parents that we want the child to conform, don't stand out, learn the behaviors and replicate them and mirror them. And I would say in today's world, as minorities, as people who perhaps do not hold the same beliefs and the same values and the same teachings as the majority, you want to be able to raise children who will grow up to be adults who are confident, who can speak up for themselves, who do not necessarily conform, and they still know how to be themselves in a respectful way and hold their own and not simply conform to conform, right? You do not follow blindly because the majority follows blindly. This is not Islamic. And so this has to be part of our Islamic upbringing and Islamic teaching, and this becomes even more important in these types of settings where you see that clearly it is becoming more and more difficult for you to not conform, to be yourself, to continue to hold the values that you hold, and to know how to hold them in this kind of more complex, more messy context. In any case. So with all of that said, this brought us to the discussion, and inshallah today this is where we left off and where we continue. We said that Islam recognizes that human beings as children, and now I'm using the term broadly as children, between the age of 0, between the time that they are born and until they reach adulthood, they go through stages. And Islam identifies 3 big stages, keeping in mind that there are other stages within. And we have indications to those stages. And we also have indications that, of course, not every child is going to be going through these stages at the same rate. Not every child is going to be, reaching those, nothing magical happens on those dates. So when Islam says, for instance, the first 7 years, the second 7 years, the third 7 years of the life of a child, which is generally speaking how Islam views those stages of childhood until you reach full adulthood. Those stages, there's nothing magical that happens on your 7th birthday or your 8th birthday, right? It's a general indication that our religion is giving. And of course, if you go back to the narrations, you also find a lot of indications to this, that while the ahadith say, for instance, at 7, we have a hadith in which Ahlul Bayt say, but what we do with our own children, we do it at 5. So you see that they consider their children to be ready to take on more responsibility, to be exposed to more knowledge, for instance, or to be held accountable with more at a younger age. Which means that for us, we could do the same. If you feel that the child is ready, that they can handle more, of course you can go faster. And you have the opposite as well. Sometimes the child at 7 is not ready. A child may be ready at 5, another one is going to be ready at 9, and that's fine too. Generally speaking, these are going to be the ages that Islam is proposing. We said the 3 big layers or the big stages of childhood to adulthood are described in various metaphors, depending on which Imam you look at, which hadith you look at. They say that there's the first 7 years, the second 7 years, and the third 7 years, which brings a child from the age of birth until the age of about 21. And there's other ahadith that go a little bit beyond. But generally speaking, the majority of the ahadith are 7, 7, 7. The first 7 years, the child is described in a lot of these ahadith as being a king or a flower. The king is the one who rules. And you cannot come and impose much on the king. And Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam tell us that the child in their first 7 years are the child, your son or your daughter, is the king or the queen. And that's exactly how it is. When the child wants to eat, it eats. And when the child wants to sleep now, it sleeps now. And you have to go out of your way to ensure that this is provided to the child, because they are in that stage of life. And this is what it means when they say the child is a king at this time. They give orders, and your job is to implement and to execute those orders. And then you move to the second stage of 7 years. This is where a lot of the ahadith use one term. This is a term that comes back again and again and again. There's a couple of other terms, but the main term that comes back is the child is now a servant. And this is because this is when the child is going to learn the majority, the main part of discipline and learning. Learning the habits, getting the discipline, acting in the right way. They're going to start understanding the basics of knowledge, of manners, of how to be, the respect, the conduct, the behaviors, the values. The basics of all of that are going to happen between the ages of about 7 till the age about 14. And then after that, we have the Islamic teachings that tell us that at that point, the child becomes your wazir. They become your right hand. They become your friend in some of the ahadith. And here's because the child is now no longer really a child. They've reached a point where they are an autonomous person. They are not ready for full adulthood yet, but they have a lot more autonomy and a lot more maturity and a lot more of an independent personality and thinking now, and you have to give them that space. And the way that you discipline and the way that you teach and the way that you bring up can no longer be the same way as when the child was 7. It becomes a lot more like a friend that you're trying to influence and trying to convince and trying to make see the right path and so on and so forth. But in order to have the right relationship, and this is the point that we're trying to make today, to emphasize, in order to have the right relationship in that third stage, you have to have set the right relationships in the second stage and the first stage. So that now you can have that relationship in the third stage where the child is your friend or the child is your wazir. You can consult them, you can ask their opinion, you can give them a lot more latitude and a lot more freedom and a lot more respect because you've set the ground and you set the stage for all of that to take place. So if you go back to Islamic teachings, you see that for each one of these stages, there are very specific approaches and tools and methods that are proposed for each one of them. And of course, different duties and responsibilities and rights that belong to each one of these stages as well. One, I think, idea that is important to mention is that sometimes the first 7 years are interpreted or understood as being a complete free-for-all. As we've mentioned in the past, the child is a king, which means nothing goes and you let the child do whatever they want and whatever they ask for, they get it at the same instant and so on and so forth. We can't exaggerate this. This is still within a certain balance. And if you go back to Islamic teachings, you see that even during that first 7 years, there are still a lot of teachings or a lot of principles in Islam that stay, for instance, that you are keeping a careful watch over the child. You are ensuring that you are teaching them certain things at certain times when they are 3 and when they are 4 and when they are 5. We start to see teachings. So it means that it's not a complete free-for-all. There is still a lot of rigor around it. It's just that when it comes to the discipline and the freedom of the child and so on and so forth, the rigor cannot be the same as when the child starts to understand what it means to start to impose a certain discipline and a certain way of being day to day, weekly, monthly, yearly. We're moving towards a purpose. We're trying to achieve results and so on and so forth, that the child starts to understand at a little bit later in their maturity. So in the first stage, the first 7 years, and we want to focus a little bit more on that. Why is it that our religion gives this much importance? We said, and I repeat this one very quickly, there's a lot of importance given to the first 7 years in multiple ways, and we'll mention a couple again, because our religion, and today in psychology, this is matched in the latest studies, whatever you put in place during that first 7 years is going to become a blueprint for how the child is going to be the rest of their lives. Of course, this is not 100%, determined so that whatever you experience, you can never change it. But it's a lot more difficult to change what was set in place in the first 7 years than it is to change things that you acquire later in life. It becomes really your blueprint. And the most important part of that blueprint is that it affects your relationships. Depending on how you were treated in that first 7 years, it is going to affect how you view yourself, So it affects your confidence, your self-esteem, your ability to like yourself or love yourself or respect yourself as you are, and so on and so forth. So it has to do with yourself and how you view yourself. It has to do with your relationship with others. So siblings, other family members, and other people in general. Are you able to commit? Are you able to respect? Are you able to open up? Are you able to receive? All those relationships are established in the first 7 years of your life based on the level of attention and love and affection that you got from those who mattered in your life at that point, which is mainly your parents, but perhaps others around you. So that's a second period, a second important factor. The third one, and this is crucial, has to do with your future relationship with your parents. And this is what we're talking about. And now there are studies about this. When Imam Ali alayhi salam or others say that your child is going to be your wazir in the last 7 years, from 14 to 21, it's because you set the stage for that in the earlier stages. Depending on how you treated the child in the first 7 years and the second 7 years is going to go a very long way in being able to have that right relationship in the third 7 years. And so when we say that you want to now guide children who are now in teenage years or beyond, and this is a recurrent theme in our communities, all this cannot start when the child is. There are things that we can do to try to remedy and correct and play catch up. But that relationship did not start suddenly and magically when the child hit their teenage years. Of course, the child is going to go through all sorts of changes. They want to become autonomous. They want freedom. They want their own personality, their own free, space to make their own choices, and so on and so forth. This is normal. This is the case of every human being. They might rebel, they might push back, they might question, they might become critical, and so on and so forth. But so long as you're able to contain that and direct that and maintain the relationship with the child, with your own child, or have people in the life of the child to whom they can look up to, they can still get enough guidance that they don't deviate too far, then all of that is part of the natural process of growing up. It's when you go too far in or not far enough in the first two stages that you make this third one a lot more difficult for yourself to try to play catch up and try to fix it now. In any case, so that was the third point, the importance, why our religion gives so much importance to that first stage of 7 years. And here is where we find today, there's a lot of studies. There's a very famous book. It's a bestseller now. To give one example, there's many other books, but this one has become a bestseller. A lot of people are reading it or reading parts of it. And the author is very well known and he works around all of this. Gabor Mate with Gordon Neufeld. They wrote a book and it's called Hold On to Your Kids. Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And we live in a world where they say, these psychologists, psychotherapists, they say that your children need you to be the most present person in their lives, not their peers. Naturally, the way the world has evolved today, your children are going to start spending more time with others than their parents. And of course, they're going to be influenced by what they are being exposed to. So how do you ensure that you are going to remain as the main source of knowledge, the source of influence, direction, guidance in the life of your child, to provide the discipline they need without pushing them away, without losing them so that they want to turn away? No, they want to be. That's what they need, and they know they need it, and they are going to get it from you. They are going to continue to receive it from you. That's the same idea. And this is now very famous, very well known. People are working on this. They try to implement it in their families, in their communities, and so on and so forth. And I wanted to link it to all of this in one hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, in which he says, your children are your flowers for 7 years, and your servants for 7 years, and then they are either your friend or your foe. You want to know what kind of relationship you're going to get in that third 7 years? Look at what you did in the first 2 stages of 7 years. This is what's going to a large extent, determine whether you're going to get a friend or a foe, an enemy, in that third stage, and then the child is going to come back to you and stay with you and at your side, or they're going to go in a completely different direction and consider you to be a foe, as the Imam says here. The last point, and inshallah after this I try to go a little bit faster, the last point related to this is that we said the importance of this stage has to do with establishing the blueprint for your relationships in life. We said your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, your relationship with your parents, and your relationship with God. And this is not addressed in a lot of psychology. There are a few studies in psychology that talk about this, but Ahl al-Bayt talk about this. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam talks about this very clearly. He says when you promise things to your children, make sure that you always do what you promised them, or at least find a way to make them see that you did not break your promise. That do not let them go hungry or, feel like you are not providing their basic needs, because to them you are the sustainer and you are the provider, and which is when you grow in maturity, this is how we understand our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sustains me, is the one who provides for me, is the one who protects me. And the model I have in miniature, of course it's not fully, but in miniature, the model that I have, subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to create us as human beings in that model, is my parents. They are the ones who hardwire me for this, so that I understand this type of relationship, so that later I am able to apply it in a more abstract way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a more absolute way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, don't break that relationship in that stage where the child doesn't understand, where their most basic of needs are being hardwired. You have to be able to provide for them in a way that does not break their personality and therefore make their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala difficult later in life. And this makes our roles as parents a lot more significant and a lot more deep and a lot more sensitive than what we might think. We just let it happen and, it should end up being okay. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have given us a lot more to think about when it comes to that type of relationship. And here we're not even talking about all children. We said this is all about the first 7 years. And why I'm spending a little bit more time on it is usually we don't talk about this enough. When all of this is, explicitly and directly given to us from Ahlul Bayt. This is not even us going very far in analyzing and thinking about the deeper meanings behind this and the deeper repercussions. This is given to us as is from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, 14 centuries ago. Okay, so this is what we have to take and see, therefore, what does this mean for us? And as we said, this is inshallah what we can address later. This is the why, the how. For the how, special attention needs to be given to younger children, and we talked about this and I will not repeat it. We talked about the importance that our religion gives to raising children in that stage with a lot of humor and a lot of play. And we said that our religion recognizes that this is how children learn. You're not playing with the child when you're playing with the child. You are teaching the child when you're playing with the child. So choose carefully how you play with that child, because every act of play is in fact an act of learning. What are they learning from your play? And if you want to teach a child, do not teach them by teaching them, teach them by playing with them, especially when they're in younger ages. They have to find this to be entertaining. They have to find a playful aspect to this. And this is why in some of our hadith, we're told that playing with the child is an act of worship, is an act of ibadah. Okay, in any case. So I won't spend more time on this. Then the what. So we talked about the importance of understanding why Islam gives this much importance. The how, and we've talked a little bit about the how. Then the why, the what. And in the what, we talked about that the first 7 years, for instance, are not a free-for-all. And I think this is important. If you go back to more specifically to Islamic teachings, you see that there are teachings about beliefs, there are teachings about manners, There are teachings about manners and conduct, let's say, akhlaq, and how you conduct yourself, to learn to say salam, to learn to deal with adults, to learn. These are all manners that you're supposed to teach in that first 7 years. And even very light acts of worship and rituals, which today we would call fiqh, right? Very light, but you're supposed to start so that the child understands, generally speaking, this is how you perform the prayer. They are introduced to the idea of fasting, even though they may not be able to fast a full day or all 30 days of the month of Ramadan, right? So all of this needs to start being introduced to children. There are indications also during that first stage to teach the seerah, to know the seerah of the Holy Prophet, to know the seerah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam at the level of the child, and to learn the Quran. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they say, you have to teach them to love Ahlul Bayt during that time. And you have to teach them to recite the Quran at their level. But this is a clear duty that they are putting upon the parents. Okay? Now, this brings us to the idea of, therefore, if we want to be strategic and well organized, especially as communities, therefore we need a curriculum for children. Maybe in the past it was easy for us to say, we just make it happen. There's a mosque, you just send them to the imam or the sheikh or the teacher in the mosque and they'll take care of it, and so on and so forth. Today we can't do that. You have to be more strategic and have foresight and planning and organize it properly. What kind of curriculum do we need for the children? At what age? Do we need a curriculum, Islamic education when the child is 3, 5, 7, 9? What are they learning? Does it address everything or some parts? What should they be exposed to? At what frequency? And so on and so forth. Right? So all of this should be part of, if we're talking about communities of knowledge, this needs to be part of the thinking of those communities of knowledge. There is an insistence in the ahadith, just to cover it quickly, on beliefs. So to know that there's a God, and to know that there's religion, and to know that there's a judgment day, and to know there's a prophet, and to know there are imams. At least those. And to know that there's a Quran and you know a little bit of the Quran. Because this is going to give you a foundation that you can keep building on. And to know a little bit of seerah, and to know a little bit of manners, and to know a little bit of laws and rituals. Other things that are non-religious, if you want to look at it as in the strict sense, the importance of athleticism and good health and physical education and movement. We have a lot of ahadith about this, especially in today's world where all the studies are showing that the children and the youth are increasingly out of shape and increasingly less and less athletic, and so on and so forth. In our religion, there's a lot of importance given to this. We have a lot of ahadith, starting from the Holy Prophet all the way down to the Imams, that emphasize all of this. So this should go hand in hand. I won't spend time on this. It should go hand in hand with what you put in your body in the first place. Okay, junk food and so on and so forth, sleeping habits, all of that we've talked about in the past. When we were talking about the learner in Islam and how do you become a good learner, we spent a lot of time on these. This applies again to raising children, upbringing of children. This is the foundation. Before I talk about athleticism, I have to talk about what's going in your body. 1. Then 2, our religion says, the Holy Prophet says, for instance, that it's encouraged for children to learn to be good runners, to ride, to learn archery, to learn swimming. Teach your children. The Holy Prophet says, teach your swimming, riding, archery, and swimming, in one hadith, for instance. And this is important. Generally, we can generalize it and say, the Holy Prophet's saying, play some sports, move your body, stay athletic, stay in shape, stay healthy. I would go a little bit further. The Holy Prophet is identifying specific activities. They have purpose. And this is unfortunately something that we miss. What are you learning? It's going to take time and energy and effort, and in today's world, a lot of money to learn these things. Is there a purpose behind it? Does it help you in any way? Or is it just learning to learn a sport? Because perhaps there are sports or physical activities that are much better than others. Swimming is a lot more important than many other activities. So the Holy Prophet says, this will save your life, or you might save someone's life later. Learn swimming. Or for that world, when he says learn to ride, become an expert rider on the horse. In their world, there's nothing more important than that. This is extremely relevant. Today I have to think, what is the equivalent of this for me today? Maybe it's writing. Maybe writing still applies. There are certainly a lot of benefits to learning to be a good writer. And perhaps there's other things that need to replace it today because the world has changed. Archery, same thing. In that world, that was part of the reality, day-to-day reality. Today, perhaps not so much. I perhaps need to replace it with other things. Okay? The other piece related to this is that, unfortunately, especially for the brothers, I say it, but to the community in general, especially in these times, Olympics are happening and World Cups are happening and soccer and other things. One, there is a huge difference between being an athlete and being a follower of sports. That you follow everything happening in the world of sports does not make of you an athlete or a more sporty person, just to know what is happening. And so as much as there is purpose in what I'm learning as an activity, there should also be some purpose in following sports. And if we are following sports, it should be moderated and balanced. I don't want to go into more than simply to say when we are following sports, it's good for us sometimes to have a critical thought. How much time is this taking from my day or my week or my month? How much money is going into this? How much energy is going into this? I'm sure you have heard the lecturers and the speakers mention these examples of, if I were to ask you about so-and-so soccer player that you love, you can tell me when he was born and how his height and his weight and how well he kicks with the right or the left or his speed and so on and so forth. But you wouldn't be able to tell me much about Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. And Imam al-Jawad matters a lot more in your life. Or the Holy Prophet matters a lot more in your life than Messi or Ronaldo or anyone else. Right? Whatever the sport is. And it's simply to reprioritize. We're not saying completely let it go. If I can, I would say let it go. You don't need that. If I know some of you are very interested in this more critical way of thinking, so I will add this layer. And there's a lot of scholarship and thinking and writing and studies about this. One of the easiest ways to control populations in the world is through sports. This is where you create a false sense of unity in a community or in a population. You completely blind them and paralyze them and make them numb to what's going on around the world because you create the fever around that sport and the anxiety that the sport and its season and its athletes are about to happen, and then they happen, and then after they happen, and the thinking and the analysis and the industry and the marketing and the energy and all of that, while real world is still happening. But all of that is now put aside because we are focused on, let's say, a group of people trying to put a piece of rubber inside a net or so on and so forth, which really doesn't make any difference whether, this team wins or that. But now you actually believe that somehow you are one with this team or that team. You are as though you are, as a fan. It's all a delusion. None of this is real. This is one of the easiest ways, and it was well known since the time of the Romans and before and until now. This is one of the easiest ways to control populations. So for those who care, for those who have that critical social way of understanding and seeing the world, we need to be aware of this. We need to understand what we are contributing to, participating in, whether it's beneficial, truly beneficial for us or not. There's a difference between I want to become a better soccer player. I should learn the techniques, see what the best players do. There's no issue with that. There might be an actual practical purpose from this. Very different from, just spending 14 hours of my day watching soccer. That's very different. In any case, going completely on a tangent here. So we continue with the discussion of what should be taught by the father or by the parents, because there's a lot of insistence that this is the responsibility of the father when it comes to children. But of course, both parents are participants in this. There are very clear instructions in the Holy Quran and clear instructions in the Seerah of the Holy Prophet about things that have to be taught to children. And so if we are building a curriculum and we're solely relying on what is in Islamic teachings explicitly, this has to be part of it. And I would of course add that a good community needs to sit and see what else we need to complement it with to adapt it to today's world. Okay? Obedience and goodness to parents. I'm going to try not to comment on this so that we have time to finish. The importance of manners and etiquette. And you see the Holy Prophet going out of his way to say the salam to children. He would go down to their level and say salam to every child that he saw, how he greeted them, speaking to each other, speaking to adults, speaking to strangers. All of this needs to be part of what is taught. How to act. There's a difference between how the child acts inside a mosque or with friends or with family or out in public. These values that should be the foundation of our religion. For those who are interested, I would strongly encourage to study the life of the Holy Prophet, especially when he was in Mecca, with an emphasis on this, because this is where the foundations of our religion were laid. And this is where you find the values of respect, kindness, cheerfulness, optimism, being organized, lowering of the voice, the routinely manners. So what do you do when you wake up? What do you do before you fall asleep? Going to the washroom, cleanliness, eating, being around family, or the importance of family, the importance of neighbors, how to be with guests and the generosity around guests, teachers and scholars and the value that you give to them, prayers and how to give them importance, how to be in mosques, and so on and so forth. This is, very quickly, these are some of the headings that we should find in an Islamic curriculum. If I want to make sure that children at least have good role models and good stories that inspire them and motivate them, this is what I should be focusing on. Then, brotherhood in Islam, community in Islam, sincerity and honesty in everything we do, forgiveness, helping others, whatever their needs are. If I can help, I help. Generosity, consoling others, standing up to injustice. All of these are the core foundations of our religion. All of this should be part of the initial curriculum for children. And then, following the Holy Prophet's example. And this means that you have to model the behavior yourself as a parent. Okay? Prayer and worship. Simplicity in living. These are core Islamic teachings. Simplicity in living. Chastity. Love and attachment to the Holy Quran, and love and attachment to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Now, we were focused on the community of knowledge. So I have to spend a couple of minutes on knowledge. Encouragement to seek knowledge, to understand the importance of knowledge, and to understand the power of knowledge. By learning, this is the power that you're going to gain later in life. Honoring knowledge. Honoring scholars, honoring students because of the knowledge that they carry. And this completely changes how that child views the world, by the way. And they become a lot more objective in their ability to assess people and associate with people. To know the truth. That should be a prime motivation in the child. And this is something that you can put in them. Always go dig to find the truth. Are you satisfied? Do you feel like this is the full truth, or is there more? This is extremely important. Once this is in someone, they never stop. There's a lot more to discover all the time. To know the truth. To act based on knowledge. You don't act because you just want to, or someone just said. You want to act based on knowledge or the truth, right? To be sincere. So you know the truth and you act in a way that is compatible with that truth. And to remain strong. And this gives you immunity because you know the truth. It makes you strong. You know where you stand. You know where you can negotiate and where you cannot. Okay, to invite to the truth. And this is where you can start opening up to others. Now I am confident I have enough to share with others. I have something to present to others that is attractive, that they want to learn, they want to acquire. And of course, a quick mention here that in some cases, there is the whole discussion of your duty versus the results. As a parent, all you can do is put all of this in place. And you cannot guarantee and you cannot not secure that the outcome is going to be what you're hoping for. And you're not responsible for that outcome. What you're responsible for is making sure that you have acted in a way that matches your duties, your responsibilities. That there were no lacks, there were no shortcomings, that you did what you could to present what you could to the child in every stage in the best way you could. and that's it. Okay, and I think this is very important to mention because this can create a lot of anxiety and issues in parenting. Practical tips to known challenges. Quickly again, when we look at all of this and what we find in our communities, quick remarks. Something that we need to instill in children is that academic success is not everything. It's very important because we said understanding the importance of knowledge and the power that it gives you, but it is not everything. And material or monetary or financial success is also not everything. As important as it is, and we want them to be successful and want them to be strong and we want them to be prosperous in life, it's still not everything. There's a lot more to life than these successes. So we need to raise our children and the youth in the community in a way that we would call, in short, Islamic. Islam is balanced and realistic. Islam is the perfect balance between spiritual and material. You have needs, you meet them. There's nothing wrong with being successful, and there's nothing wrong with being prosperous, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying life and luxuries and comforts, but it's balanced. It's the right priority is given to your world here versus your eternal life after. What you need versus non-stop wants and infinite desires. Do you really need it? Do you have a practical purpose for it? Or is this just excessive luxury and comfort that perhaps is not justified when there are others who need it more? This is where your discipline and your spirituality has to kick in. It cannot be unrestrained. And you have to be happy with that. You have to feel like you are being balanced and you are being realistic. In any case, next point. Knowledge and awareness of their surroundings and the world. And this has to start at a young age. Everything that the child is exposed to, you have to start explaining to them what they are being exposed to. So that eventually, when they are alone, because there is no way for you to teach them everything for every situation or police them or be by their side to guide them all the time, you want them to have a little bit of an internal restraint, that they know this is wrong. You have to know that, if it's as simple as junk food, perhaps be a little bit careful in what you put in your mouth. It's going to affect you. And these are some of the effects of it. And this is where you have to find your own way of communicating that with the child. You're the parent, you're the mother or the father. You have to play that role. You have to make sure that in today's world where you see study after study that too much screen time is extremely harmful for children and even adults, but much more for children, they have to find a way to instill that in children so that they have a little bit of a immunity, a little bit of a self-restraint. And of course, at their level, you cannot expect them to have that much self-restraint. As adults, we don't have that much self-restraint. So imagine the child who hasn't even developed this discipline yet. You can't put the child in a situation where they're exposed to things that are harmful to them and expect them to just act in the right way. And so this is also part of your duty as a parent. What are you exposing them to? Are you expecting too much of the child that by exposing them to things, you're giving them the freedom, you're giving them the junk food or the device or whatever else? I'm just taking any simple example here. And then expecting the child to act with full discipline, that's not realistic. Correct? And then the behaviors of those around them. The child has to have an awareness to what extent they are being influenced by those around them. They have to know that every behavior they see is being introduced into them. Even if the child knows that this is wrong. You spend enough time around that behavior will come in. That language will come in. That clothing will come in. Those mannerisms will come in. Okay? And then, as we said, try to help the child to be good. And that's part of being sometimes a tougher parent and restricting access to those things. So that when the child is exposed to them, they're not exposed to them 24/7. Because if they are, of course, there's going to be moments of weakness, even if it's the best of children. So that they are exposed to them in a way that is realistic for the child to have a little bit of discipline when they are exposed to them. In any case, all of this, by the way, applies to adults in the same way, but we're just focusing on upbringing right now. The last point here, and there's a lot more to say, but a lot of examples have to do with, ensuring that you're putting as much emphasis on knowing what is right and wrong from within. Because you're not going to be there all the time. And so the more awareness a child has, and the more modeling they witnessed and they were exposed to from you, the better they are able to react when put in the situation. You're never going to be there in every situation they're put in. So how is the child going to be relying on what they carry with themselves internally when they are exposed to all of these things? How are they supposed to be when they're all alone in the mall? How are they supposed to be when they're alone in school with friends, or just simply all alone, and so on and so forth? Influence of friends, the types of content that they see, whether it's a movie or a novel or social media or so on and so forth. And this can continue for a very long time. From all of this, and this is to bring it back to that question, or that the question we should ask when we look at a book like, Hold On to Your Kids. Who is raising your children? Can you safely say that I am raising my children when I have children? Or do I feel like society is raising them for me? Or their friends are raising them for me? Or their school is raising them for me? What are the sources of influence? How much can you safely say that I am the one who is exposing my children to what they need to be exposed to? And how do I control that, or how do I influence that? I think this is a part of the key. And as we said, the key cannot be that we are teaching specific behaviors, as important as this are. It needs to be that you want the child to have a sort of inner attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to feel the presence of God at all times. And this is going to have a huge influence on how that child is going to behave when in need. The importance of the relationship of the parents with each other. This is another key that perhaps we don't spend enough time on in our communities. A huge part of the way that the child is going to be conducting themselves in life is what they see in terms of a relationship between their father and their mother. And this has to do with relationship between the two adults that the child considers to be the two perfect examples of what a human being is going to be for a very long time in their lives. To some people, this is going to be until they're teenagers. To some people, it's going to be for life. Okay? Depending on who you are and your background and so on and so forth, those are the two people that to you are the most perfect two examples of a human being. And so the relationship that they see between the parents goes a very long way in determining how the child is going to be, or the type of family that they will create later. Okay? I won't say more for that. The community of knowledge and Islamic upbringing. And this is the idea of the village. There's this African proverb that says that it takes a village to raise a child. And there's a lot that we can say around this. The clear idea that we started the whole discussion around family with is that we no longer live in villages, and we no longer live in a society that is based on traditional values. And this went in a very long way in preparing you to live in a group of people, to teach you how it is or what it means to have responsibility towards other people, or to watch what we can call the arch of life. You know, when you're a child and you have every aspect or every stage of life that you are exposed to every day. You have your grandparents or your great-grandparents living with you, and your uncles and your aunts and your cousins and your siblings and so on and so forth that you're constantly exposed to. And you see how each and every one of them has different needs. And you see people coming to, how they behave with a great-grandparent is going to be very different than how they behave with a cousin. The child is automatically and intuitively learning a lot of this. And it will be part of who they are for later in life. Today, none of this exists. Correct? And so when it comes on the other side to the parent trying to raise the child, the parent used to have a whole network of people who were raising the child with them. Every one of them was doing a little bit of that. The cousins and the aunts and the siblings and everybody was contributing, and the families were larger and so on and so forth. And today it's what they call the nuclear family, right? It's the father, the mother, and the siblings, and that's the family, keeping in mind, assuming that the family has stayed together and it's working in that way and functioning as a traditional family. even in that case, this is much more difficult to do than when you compare it to the old extended family version or the village. And the village brought you to outside of that family because your neighbors also knew you and they were also a very extended family, but everyone knew everyone. And you know everyone who lives on your street, and the whole village is 7 streets, and that's it. It's you, 300 people, and you live together, and you help each other, and everybody knows what's going in everyone else's house, and so on and so forth. All of that is now out the window, and the parent is coming back to being all alone. And this can become overwhelming, especially when you are in a minority situation, going against the trends, going against the current, trying to teach or raise or upbring your children in a way that is not aligned with where society is pushing them. Yes, this can become overwhelming for parents because you feel that you are all alone. And the truth is, you are not as alone as you think you are. There are many others in the same situation, which brings us back to the whole discussion around the community and the community of knowledge. That if the village does not exist anymore and you are not growing up with the village around you as a support system, create the village that you need. Go get them, put them in place. Find people, but this is the key, find those that have these values and believe in these teachings and want to work towards them. And this is how you bring families together around these common purposes. And this is what the community is. And this is one more aspect or one more angle from which we can address the topic of the community. Especially when, as we said, uncertain times, difficult, challenging times, we become a lot stronger together. So this is great for the parents. This is great for the child. The child needs this. The child needs to being exposed to other children like them, other families like them, people who are, and this is the key, like-minded. And this is where you have to be a lot more selective. It's not simply because someone is a Muslim like you that they believe in all of this that we just presented, or that they want to make a movement towards this. It's one thing to have awareness that this is in Islam. A lot of people don't. But let's say you have all this awareness. It doesn't mean that you actually want to learn the details or actually want to make changes in your life to move in that direction and take your family in that direction. And that's why we say, be selective. In who are you bringing in your life? Who are you bringing into that community and building that community around? What does your village look like? And there is, a whole discussion. I'm racing against time. There's a whole discussion around, they say, and there's a lot of studies on this, they say what are the most important ingredients or factors that lead to who you are going to be later in life. And of course, there are those who focus on what you put in your body and your nutrition and your health and so on and so forth. There are studies about the resources that you have access to. For instance, were your parents wealthy? Did you have access to money? Were you able to do things and so on and so forth? Some studies focus on the stimulation that you get. Were you exposed to challenges and projects that you have to deal with and duties and responsibilities and accountability, perhaps at a younger age? There are studies, for instance, on, if you are the first of the siblings and everybody is younger than you, were you given more responsibility than others, which, shapes your personality later in life and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of studies that say all of these are secondary. What matters the most in most people's lives for the rest of their lives is none of these. And it is, in one word, if I'm going to summarize all of that, it's the community they grew up in. Or how they say it is the network of people you had access to growing up. Who did you know? Who were those people? What were their beliefs? What were their resources? Who were they? And this is what we're talking about. This would apply as much as, you want financial prosperity. Yes, this would work. If this is your priority in life, and this is what you want to do with your children, go in a community where there is financial prosperity. It's that is going to determine that aspect of it. But if you care about what we've been talking about, which is an Islamic community of knowledge, or what we believe to be raising the best human beings that you can for this world and the next, then what you should be looking for is those types of communities. This is what will go the longest way in shaping this person for the rest of their lives. Conclusion. So the role of the family in the development of the community of knowledge is what we've been trying to cover. And as we said, the idea here was not to talk about the family in short in Islam. We're focused on the role of the family in a community of knowledge in Islam. One of the important keys here is our conclusion, what we think is our conclusion, is to have an awareness that the greatest contributor to creating a community of knowledge, perhaps there is no other match to this, in being able to create people who are going to want to play a role in a community of knowledge, to participate in a community of knowledge, to contribute to it and to improve it over time, so that from one generation to another, this community of knowledge gets better, is to have families as part of the community of knowledge, not individuals. It's not you as a person. It's you as a whole family, as a hook to a family that you bring into the community of knowledge. This is what sustains the communities of knowledge over time. This is what ensures that the community of knowledge stays alive and improves. If today we're going to start a community of knowledge here, of course we hope that in 50 years it's going to be much better than what we have today. This should be the most primitive, the most simple, and perhaps the most mistaken way of doing things, because we don't know any better. We put in place what we could, and then it should improve. And the fastest way to make sure that this improves is by bringing families into the equation and making sure that every member in that family has a place in that community of knowledge. The second point related to this is us as communities. Now, I'm not talking about communities of knowledge, communities in general. As mosques, as community centers, as Hasaniyat, as believers, as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we need to make sure that the voices of the families are heard. It cannot just be the voice of you as a youth, or you as a woman, or you as a man, or you as a... It needs to be you as a family. Do you have a voice? Everything that we talked about cannot exist in a vacuum. These are not separate from each other. The only way to provide all of this in a comprehensive, holistic way is to have a voice of the family. The needs of the family have to be explained. And therefore, these places have to react to those needs. And not the specific. The specific needs need to be addressed too. But we tend to only focus on the specific needs. Today we're going to have a program for, and you name it, one separate entity. Okay, most people are coming with a family. There should be something for the family, not one entity in the family where you're intentionally excluding the others. Where are the others supposed to go? What's supposed to happen with them? And this has to force us to rethink how we build our community centers, how we structure our programs, how we create our programs, who works, who presents. All of this has to be rethought if we're thinking about the entire family. Right? That's our second point. Thirdly, when we're talking about the communities and the role of the family in them, this is going to ensure, therefore, that the values are passed on, that the basic religious education is passed on, that the manners and etiquettes are passed on. And I intentionally mention these because this is what we constantly hear about in our communities, that is going sideways and being broken, and we're losing it, and we're losing our identity, and we're not able to maintain all of this. And then to ensure that through the family, no matter what programming you can put in, what's the programming going to be? 1 hour, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week? And then you have 24 hours a day, every day for the rest of the week, where that program is not happening. And this is where the family comes in. The family has to make sure that there is oversight. What did you learn? How do we apply it? And make sure that this is managed day in and day out in a rigorous way so that it's not lost. I brought you somewhere, there was a crash course, they taught you about beliefs, they taught you about Imam al-Mahdi, they taught you this dua about Imam al-Mahdi. Okay, great. And we forget about it and we move on. No, this dua has to become part of your daily routine. You learn something, we acquire it. This is not the program that you paid for and the child went to that's going to ensure that. That's you in the house that's going to ensure that. With you following up every single day, and it will be forgotten, and you have to put it again, and you have to find ways and loopholes and hacks to make sure that this does not get lost. One little tiny piece at a time, one tiny little step at a time, correct? And then we continue with, we talked a lot about the content you're being exposed to, the people you're being exposed to, so on and so forth. We talked about all of this. The importance of modeling the behavior. You can be exposed to a lot in these lectures, in these workshops, in these lessons. What is the behavior that is being modeled to you? It's only when you've reached a lot of maturity in life, much later in life, that you can have a critical eye and say, maybe the behavior that I witnessed, that I was exposed to, was not the best of behavior. And then good luck trying to change your habits now. But at least you're aware that perhaps this was not the best behavior and it has now hardwired you, and now you have to reformat yourself and rewire yourself. But in the case of the child, they can't do that. They don't have that maturity, that abstract thinking, that critical eye. And so this is where the role of the family is, because there were questions earlier in the series about what is the role of the family within the, let's say, this is a huge role, that all of this has to be put in application in the family, in the household. It needs to be modeled, which means that you have to be aware of what are they being exposed to. If it's good, it means we have a lot of hard work to do in the family to change those things so that we start modeling those things. This is what the children see. This is what we see. This becomes our normal, by default, way of being, and so on and so forth. And understanding that, especially fathers, but understanding that parents are responsible for this. So you understand that you have a religious duty, but this does not necessarily mean that the parents have to become the religious experts in all of this. Your job is to make sure that this is available for the children to learn, to be exposed to be aware of. And then you do what you can in modeling the behavior, as we said. You don't need to become the expert in all of this. It's not realistic to expect everyone to become an expert in all of this. Okay? We talked a little bit about the distinguishing feature because there was a question about it. And we said, in short, if we are actually able to build this, then we think that the distinguishing feature of this is that it's going to generate people who want to be part of an Islamic community of knowledge, who contribute to it generationally. So at every generation there are more people coming in because they were brought up with this. And they feel at ease, and they feel at home in this, and they want to be part of it. And the parents, as we said, they have to ensure that these ingredients are available. And through a community, this is a lot easier. And we said the opposite. It would be very improbable that you are able to sustain or improve on communities of knowledge if you do not have families contributing and belonging to it with time. Or it's a lot more hard work. I'm just looking at how we end all of this, given the time that we have. What we tried to bring together in the last few lectures, I think we need to go a little bit outside the family. We talked about the family for about, this is the 4th lecture, and inshallah we're wrapping it up today. We need to link it to the 2 previous discussions that we had about who belongs to the community of knowledge, specifically as family members. We talked about youth and children, and we talked about women. Now we have to put it all together with everything that we said about the families, to say that at the end, there are unmatched benefits to creating communities of knowledge that have families belonging to them, participating in them, contributing to them, that are built on Islamic teachings. This goes a much further way than trying to bring separate individuals into the communities of knowledge. The second point is that We have to be aware of the dimension of community. And the third point is how to participate in. And this requires thinking on our part. How do we participate in the communities or the social dimension in Islam? What do we have to contribute? How do we contribute? How do we plan? How do we ensure that we have foresight? We think about the future. We think about the needs today of the community so that we react to it and build communities that are realistic, that are balanced, and where everyone in the community has something to contribute to and something that they are benefiting from. So we'll stop here. We have a few minutes before prayer. So questions, concerns, comments, more than welcome. And inshallah, with this, we have wrapped up the heading of the family in the community of knowledge. There's a couple more headings that we want to cover in the community of knowledge. One of them has to do with the non-Islamic expertise required in communities of knowledge. I'm going to simply call them the intellectuals. The other one has to do with the distinguishing features of this community of knowledge. We've been talking about it from the beginning. What does a community of knowledge look like? If we actually had a community of knowledge, what would that look like? What are some of the main traits of that community of knowledge? We'll try to cover those very quickly, and then inshallah we'll wrap up the community of knowledge and move to the next heading in the series. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.